Hey guys, welcome back to Corky Gachas, and in this video I'll take a look at a new character, Honglan, that's coming to Eversoul tomorrow and see whether she is truly worth your Everstones. Let's dive right in. So as you can see, we're currently on the pre-win website because Honglan has not yet been released, so we can only base our review based off the pre-win website. And very importantly, we are going to first look at the category for Honglan, right? And this is something I've never touched on before. And you can see right here, Honglan is categorized as a caster. Why is this important? Because we can base off her stats by referencing the other units that are in this similar category. So if you look at someone like a Vivi, Naya, these are casters. And usually, rather always, right, I've looked through all the casters, they always have roughly 60k, at least 60k attack when you apply the artifact. So I would say that very safely Honglan should have at least 60k attack, right? So this is a good reference point that I'm also going to be including so that you can at least know, like, the multipliers are good, right? Good and dandy, but you need to understand what is the natural attack that they are being based off, so that we can also understand whether she is suited to be a damage dealer or just a support. So by her being a caster, I can tell you that her DPS potential is definitely there, so we have to first look at her skills to determine further whether she is truly suited to be a DPS unit. So right into her skills, we're going to first touch on the sub skill as usual. So sub skill 1 is Ice Dragon. Sends out Ice Dragon, dealing damage and then in a 1.5 meter wide straight line to the nearest enemy, and inflict freeze damage equals to 50% every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. So at max, right, it's 120% damage. Freezing damage changes to 60%, duration change to 12 seconds. So based off this, right, if the full duration runs off, she's going to take 120% plus 360% damage, dealing 480% attack. So this is quite significant if the freeze is not being cleansed off. So just before we proceed further, right, freeze is a mechanic that Nini already has, so this is not entirely new. I know that it might be quite misleading. Oh, does freeze like stun the target? Does freeze slow down the target? No, freeze is basically just a damage over time taker, right? So it's just like bleed, it's just like shock. So there's nothing additional being applied to it. So you can cleanse it off, and if you don't cleanse it off, 480% damage, nothing to be scoffed at. Also, you can see the footage itself, right, whereby we are facing the Honglan in 16-15. You can see her using the Ice Dragon skill, and this Ice Dragon skill can potentially hit more than one target, but on the pessimistic side, I think that we can assume that she's going to hit like max 3 targets and then average 2 targets, right, or even 1 target if there's really if she's placed on a weird angle. So positioning for Honglan is going to be quite important. If she can hit at least 2 targets, I think that Ice Dragon is a very good skill, provided she doesn't get cleansed off, right? So this is always a problem with damage over time. They might potentially get cleansed off. So next we're going to touch on the second sub skill, which is Freezing Strike. So Freezing Strike creates an ice pillar, deals damage equals to 110% in a 2.5 meters wide area nearest around the nearest target. So if the targets are frozen, they are stunned for 2.5 seconds. So at max it's 130%, and then stun duration is 3.5 seconds. So it's very significant, but provided they are being frozen, right? So a lot of people at this point might say, hey, Corky Gachas, it depends on the debuff being on the enemy itself, right? So it means that this Honglan, right, is not very reliable. You cannot reliably stun the target, and this is what other people also say. But to that, I would disagree, because based on her sub-skill rotation that I've analyzed, her sub-skill rotation, mainly the main takeaway is that she's going to always use 1 Ice Dragon, right? So she's going to use Ice Dragon, then she's going to do 1 normal attack, and then Freezing Strike. So it always repeats in this way. So Ice Dragon, normal attack, Freezing Strike, meaning there's only 1 normal attack, duration gap itself, whereby you can cleanse off, or enemies can cleanse off the debuff of her. Otherwise, it's not going to be effective. So most of the time, Ice Dragon and Freezing Strike is going to hit the same target, and that target is always going to be still in a frozen state, and hence I think that this stun is pretty reliable. 3.5 seconds is nothing to be scoffed at, especially when you take into consideration normally she's going to hit the tank, but at the end game stage, whereby you have a lot of like those annoying healers such as Clara, such as Catherine, right, the 3.5 second stun can come in super handy. So I think it's going to be pretty decent, this skill. And next we are going to touch on her passive skill. Okay, this one is crazy broken. So it's Blue Dragon's Dignity. I think this is the first time I'm going to be wowed by a passive skill, and this is the first thing that people are attracted to, right, for Honglan's kit, because this is super freaking OP. At max, its speed decrease changes to 14%, evasion decrease by 21%, and it's permanently all enemies. It's ridiculous. Just think about it. It's ridiculous. 14% for the whole duration of the battle itself, and evasion minus 21. So for context wise, VV's speed up only gives 15% for 10 seconds for all the allies, right? And it's based off the rotation itself. So 10 seconds there is downtime. Speed decrease for Honglan, no downtime. Almost equivalent to VV's speed increase. Very insane. For evasion wise, we can compare her to someone like Nicole or Lindsay. So Nicole minus evasion by 30, and from what I've used Nicole for, like on some stages to counter, Lindsay is very effective already at 30. So I would imagine 21 is also pretty decent, as well as Lindsay. Usually she increases her, like with a sub skill, she increases her evasion by 50. So effectively cut that almost by half. So very, very good passive here, and I think this is also going to be one of the main points on why you might want to have more copies of Honglan, because you want her to potentially survive through the whole duration, right? But of course, if you're able to protect her, you can still run with one Epic or Epic Plus, it's fine. But going to later chapters, you're going to have a harder time with enemies such as Flynn that are going to potentially pull her or damage her right out of her sub-skill itself. So this is something that you have to consider when trying to account for her survivability, because her survivability is utmost important given that her passive skill is outright broken. I'll just say it, outright broken. Okay, next, we're going to touch on her Glacier Shower, her main skill. So, throws a heavy rain of ice, inflicting damage equals to 110% to all enemies, decreases their mana by 1500, freezes them, and dealing 55% every 2 seconds for 8 seconds. So, at max, it's 130%. Freezing damage changes to 65%. So, 65 times 4, that gives us 260%. So, in total, it's 390%. And then mana decreased by 2000. So I still don't exactly know each and every unit's max mana, so this one we cannot judge, but on average we can say that their mana ranges around 9k to 10k. So this is like 1/5 of their bar gone with just one main skill. And one main thing to note is that this main skill hits all enemies, so we have to compare her to other units who also hits like all targets, right, with her main skills, and that is no one. Yeah, exactly, there is no one in the game. I checked. Really, there is no one that hits all enemies. So potentially 390% damage on all enemies. It's pretty ridiculous. Of course, most of her damage comes from the fact that it's provided that they are being frozen, right? So they wouldn't be able, like, you cannot cleanse off because there's a damage over time. So that's the downside. But just think about it, even at 130% attack, it's potentially dealing times 5, that is 650% attack with a main skill, and decreases their mana bar by 2000, which is 20%. Not even considering the fact that this is a 65%, like this 65%, and I would confidently say that they can, or Honglan can at least remove, right, or deal at least 65% of the damage, because when you minus their mana, right, most of the enemies or most of the units right now, like Prim, like Talia, right, excluding Jiho, they rely on their main skill to cleanse off the debuffs. So how can you cleanse off the debuff when I decrease your mana bar by 20%? Are you going to tell me you can cleanse it off using some magic spirit or some shit? But it's not possible. So meaning this 65% damage is at least going to go on, I would say, for at least 2 to 4 seconds, right? So 1 tick or 2 ticks, right? Half of the damage has already been accounted for. So this is what a lot of people don't think about when they think about Honglan's kit. And when I think about it, I did dive into it and I thought about it, and I was like, okay, this makes sense, right? Because you decrease their mana, they cannot cleanse it off. So this is super insane. It's quite broken. When you think about it, it's a main skill only. So quite insane. Okay, next we're gonna go into Ice Dragon's Howling Fury, which is her ultimate. So like, take a look at her kit outside of the ultimate itself. You already know that she's broken, but if we consider her ultimate, you want to use her as a DPS, you want to main Honglan, origin her, this is your first origin, whatever that is, freezes the whole battlefield, right? Take a look at this. Deals 170% attack to once again all enemies, but ultimate itself, there are a lot of skills that actually hit all enemies, so that one we don't consider. But decrease their mana by 2000, freezes the enemy, dealing 60% every 2 seconds for 8 seconds, and also stuns it for 2 seconds. So think about it this way, right? At max it's 200%, 70% the freezing damage changes, and then mana decrease changes to 2500. So if you combine the main and the ultimate skills, you take it together, right, it effectively minus half the mana bar of the enemy. So if they are about to cast their ultimates, they are about to cast their main skills, hit the main skill button, hit the ultimate button, half their bar is gone, they have to charge again, right? It's pretty ridiculous. And if you don't even consider that, right, just consider it in the same theory as by you don't use a main skill but you use an ultimate skill. If they are at full, you minus their mana by 2500, which means they need to charge back to cleanse off the freeze debuff itself. So the freeze debuff will last for quite some time, and then this would this damage I can say is confidently 2 ticks, right? So 140% plus 200%, that's 340% on top of minusing their mana and also stunning them. When you're stunned, you cannot act. When you cannot act, you cannot gain mana, outside of course gaining mana through people damaging you, but that's very minuscule. So compounded by that, I think that this is a decrease of more than 2500 mana if you really want to ask me, right, truthfully. I think if you use her ultimate, yeah, it's quite broken, but we have to definitely test it in game. But overall, this is a pretty sick kit. So now we're going to take a look at her artifact. So with the artifact, it's just a additional damage to frozen enemies with her Ice Dragon skill, and then restore mana by 200. So we're going to take it at legendary plus because this is what we usually judge it by. So mana recovers by 50%, additional damage changes to 120% on frozen enemies. So a lot of people might once again say, depending on freeze, right, otherwise her artifact is useless. No, not true, because her artifact gives her mana. When she gains her mana, she can use the main skill even more frequently, which decreases mana. So it's like a positive loop, right? And also she has 2 instances, or in fact she has 3 instances of dealing freeze, right? So you can have one cleanse, Talia cleanse one time, you have a prim enemy, prim cleanse another time. Who's going to cleanse the 3rd time, right? It's unlike Valana. Valana is good in the sense that her ultimate can have the bleed effect not being cleansable, right? So for 12 seconds the cleanse from ultimate cannot be cleansed, but she only has 1 instance of casting bleed. But this Honglan itself, she has 2 instances of casting bleed outside of ultimate, and considering ultimate we have 3 instances, so this is quite insane. So I feel like this overall kit really develops Honglan as a mana debuffing thing. And also one last thing, take a look at her stats, right? This is why I say casters have 60k attack. So usually casters will have this same offensive stat, which is crit rate, crit damage, and attack. So insane crit damage, insane crit rate, as well as strong attack percentage. So that is the whole skill review for Honglan. To sum it all, her pros and cons are pretty distinctive. I think Honglan's pros are that she's very flexible. Up until this point, I can look at her kit and I just say that her passive alone makes her worth it, right? But that's not just the only thing itself. The minus mana makes her very, very important. And also, I feel that this makes her extremely future-proof as a unit, given that, of course, we know that power creep can happen in a game like this, but I think that she will have a relatively long longevity, right, compared to a unit that is on the lower tiers right now, of course. Then for her cons itself, definitely as with all units that have damage over time, I do think that cleanse will be a big problem, but I don't think it will be as much of a problem because, as stated, I think that her minus mana kit, her minus speed kit kind of plays into her having the opportunity to keep her damage over time prolonged and sustained for a longer period of time, right, before they are cleansed off. So I think it's a small con. And also the one minor con that we want to talk about is also because she is Beast, right? So right now Beast faction is not that good. So if you really want to play her, right, optimally you want to play 4 and 1, like 4 other units, and then or 4 other factions, and then 1 from Beast, which is her, or you can play 3 and 2. But the second Beast unit that you really want to put in, you have to think about it for quite some time. Right? What do you really want to play from Beast, right? Mika Sia is out of the way. You can probably play Clara. I think that's one of the better choices. Ira is not too bad, but not optimal. And then Sunny can be used as a tank, right, if you don't really have another tank. So I think that are the only 2 cons that I can think of her from that angle. So now that we are done looking at her kit, we're going to take a look at who are the potential teammates for Honglan. And while I agree that she's super flexible and can be put on almost any team splashable, right, but I would say that there are also good potential teammates, right, ones that really elevate her kit to the maximum, and that are the AoE units. So someone like Vivian might be very good, right? So Vivi is super good because Vivi speeds her up, right, increase speed, and then while she decrease speed, and also has a AoE ultimate skill itself if you don't want to use Honglan's ultimate skill. If you are talking about normal skill AoE, then I would say that Naya is another one of those good units where you can really pair her up with the Honglan itself, and really you can do a lot of AoE damage. And AoE damage is usually not as good unless you do a lot of burst AoE damage, right? So if you add in 2 different sources, 3 different sources of AoE damage, it can come out to something great, right? Unlike only having like 1 sources of AoE damage. So That's really where the max potential comes from. Also, I think she's going to be a great help to undead teams, especially those with Violet. I don't think that, while I do think that like with Valana, she can really excel also as a Valana teammate. However, I would say that because Valana's Blade is not cleansable, right? She's not as reliant on Honglan, given the fact that the teams that really like Honglan itself, right, are those that want to have their debuffs be on all the time. So okay, Valana can also be valid if because other sources of her bleed might be cleansable, right? So if you go with an undead team, I think that would be great, but I would say that a Violet team would be really awesome. Although right now Violet is not that much usable and her skills only hit single target, so that might be something to be considered. But anything that has damage over time is going to like Honglan a lot, because she's going to decrease the speed, meaning people are going to, or enemies are going to have a harder time cleansing off, given that they have minus mana, they have minus speed, so they cannot access their main skills as frequently. Like I mentioned, Talia, like Prin, they cannot have their main skills to cleanse off the debuffs as frequently. So very good Honglan teammates over here. And of course, before we go any further, we need to give a rating predictively, right? As of now, I see her kit and experiencing her in battle itself, like facing her as an enemy. What I feel kit itself for PvE, I would first give it a rating of 4.5. I think it's quite insane when I look at Honglan just straight up like this, right? Because she can be splashed on any team. You can do a 4+1, you can do a 3+2 with fairies. I'm going to touch on her teams in subsequent videos after she's released and I've tested her myself. Now moving on to PvP, I do think that Honglan is also going to be super strong, because when you look at PvP, the main difference is that there is no ultimate. So outside of her ultimate, is she still useful? Extremely useful. As a support, extremely useful. As a DPS, very, very strong. So when you take a look at that, I think that it's quite obvious that Honglan, I can give her a 4 out of 5 for PvP as well. She's going to be great in this aspect. I don't foresee any issues for her meeting against cleansers as well, because her kit has so many aspects, right? So there's a minus speed, there's a minus evasion aspect, countering Lindsay. Like evasion is also naturally present in all enemies, right? So having a main skill miss can be very big. So having the evasion can be subtle, you don't really notice it, but it is very significant, trust me on that. So I'm giving her a 4 out of 5. And then on the bosses front, unfortunately, I would say Honglan is a 2 out of 5. This is the only aspect I think she's really lacking, but I might be wrong. This is her first impressions, right? But I do see her being an AoE like targeted kind of oriented unit, right? So all her skills do AoE damage. Although her sub-skill Ice Dragon do like potentially like high single DPS, but I do think that her kit revolves around AoE. So having a boss that is only one target, right, might not be the best. Her damage might be a bit lackluster. And also considering the fact that I do not know if the bosses in Eversoul are going to be subjected to minus speed and minus evasion. I know that some games itself, their bosses have immune to certain like debuffs, and this kind of debuffs are very like how I say, it's if they were not affected by it, then they are irrelevant, right? So, and also mana, can you really minus the mana of a boss? That I'm not sure as well. So all these are unknowns for now. Presuming that they cannot affect the boss itself, then I think that she's quite useless. And bosses, 2 out of 5 seems quite reasonable. I would rather have a Nini, because Nini apply 2 debuffs that can help Violet more, right? If you're really talking about the boss situation. So I think that 2 out of 5 seems pretty fair. Now to my final verdict on whether Honglan is worth your Everstones. I think without a doubt, 100% you need to have Honglan. She's definitely worth it. Even if at 1 copy, it's super worth it. And this is akin to me asking someone to jump and they ask me how high, right? Exactly. If I'm going to ask you, are you going to pull for Honglan? You're going to reply like 5 copies, not yes or no. So it's really a non-question, right? Just pull for Honglan. You're not going to regret it. She's going to be a great addition to any account. I think she's a great utility as a support, as a DPS. I think she's also does quite decent DPS. I might be wrong. When it comes out, we will know. I'm quite confident that she's going to be a great DPS as well, given her stats and all that. So I think definitely pull for Honglan. Personally, I'm pulling 300 times, right? Like I said, I'm going to be live streaming this 300 pulls when it comes out. Hopefully, we don't get shafted again like we did for Talia. And if you guys are interested, definitely join my live stream to see how it goes. And of course, with tomorrow's patch, not only is Honglan coming, there are also some quality of life changes. So if you are interested in finding out the spicy quality of life changes, definitely check on this video over here where I touch on the quality of life changes with the Honglan patch. I'll see you guys over there. This is Corky Gachas signing off.